What if aging wasn't just about adding years to your life, but about transforming the life in your years? What if the goal wasn't simply living longer, but living truer? Physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age, with my co-host, Corbin Bruton. In this episode, we're talking about transformative aging, moving beyond the transactional, performance-driven approach to health into a more meaningful, holistic model. We'll look at aging through the lens of Joe Ehrmann's inside-out coaching, explore the biomechanical, psychosocial dimensions of aging, revisit our SPIES model framework, and consider lifestyle versus biohacking, supplements versus nutrition, and our 6 pillars of health through a transformational lens. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health.
So, Dr. Armstrong, in episode 310, where I think the episode was the fitness myth that we teach our kids, you had mentioned that transactional coaching versus transformational coaching. So what exactly did you mean by that distinction? And can this be applied to aging well?
Yeah, so when we talked about that, transactional coaching is what we more historically kind of see in athletics, where it's all about wins and losses. The coaches are, and they're great dedicated coaches out there, you know, and you think of like youth football, there's so many parents that are dedicating their time and volunteering their time to doing these things. But transactional coaching is where it's all about just kind of teaching the win. And it's not about the athlete themselves. It's not about, you know, from early stages, it's not necessarily about athlete development. You know, so you have a lot of coaches, you know, the kids that are participating in sport that, you know, they're developing, they're going to be clumsy, they're not quite as skilled. And if they're not performing well, they're not playing. And that often leads kids to stop participating in sports that otherwise could be really, really good in sport. And transformational coaching is looking at the long picture, you know, the long track of developing that athlete, not only as an athlete, but more importantly, as a person. And so when we look at aging, you know, oftentimes when we look at the state of longevity and, you know, aging circles, the whole piece is about getting older. And it's who can live the longest. You know, I want to live to be 140 and I'm going to spend $2 million a year doing it. That's transactional. It's about just the number of years, not necessarily looking at the quality of those years in which we're living. And so transformational aging would be more like applying the SPIES model to aging well. You know, we could be, and we started out this podcast a little bit more transactional. I think we were looking at, you know, what do we do physically and, you know, through exercise, diet, not smoking, and maintaining healthy body composition. And that was the approach to aging. But as we've gotten involved more in this podcast, we've seen that sleep is so much more important. And more important than anything is the purposeful social connection. And so I think when you start looking at transactional versus transformational puts that capital P purpose in front of whatever we're doing.
Well, in Joe Ehrmann's Inside Out coaching, he talks about transactional coaches who give rewards and giving punishments versus transformational ones who connect to values and purpose. So, how do you see that applying to our approach of aging, fitness, and health?
Again, the same thing, you know, and I really love that book. And I apologize to Joe Ehrmann that I called him John several times in that episode. We corrected that. You know, the listeners might not have seen the correction, but, and embarrassed that I forgot the title of that book because it's a really phenomenal book, Inside Out Coaching. It's a little bit old because I'm pretty sure it came out before I came to Oregon, so it's got to be pushing 20 years old. But I first heard him speak in Michigan, and I really just kind of bought into this idea of transformational change and the interactions that we have with individuals. And so it's fairly easy to see it as we look at fitness and health. Transactional is, get people to be looking at their biomarkers and how's their body composition changing, doing skinfold measurements and, okay, your body fat is down. Great. Pat on the back. Or, your mile time is faster, or, your VO2 max has gone up. That's all transactional. And so when we look at that in terms of health, we're either healthy, unhealthy. But transformational would be where we're looking deeper into the individual. If we're looking at health from a medical standpoint, having a doctor that's not only asking you about symptoms, they're asking you about your life and how your life is interacting with your health, and how we can change behavior in our life and circumstances in our life in order to have better health. And so aging encompasses all of that. What is it that we can do to affect the lives of others to make aging not only healthier, to where they're, in the physical side being healthier and living longer without disease and all that, but how are they living better spiritually? How are we improving their mindset intellectually? And most importantly, how are we affecting them emotionally and socially? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm actually, that reminds me of, I'm completely drawing a blank on the coach's name. Famous coach, famous basketball coach from UCLA, created the Pyramid of Success.
John
Say it
John
again.
Wooden. How do you
John,
forget a name like John Wooden? I am not a basketball fan, and I know John Wooden, man.
I'm
Come on.
just drawing a blank on the name. It's just drawing a blank. That's all it is. Yeah, but that was his coaching status. Is winning games is awesome, and developing athletes is awesome, but we're also developing individuals to go out and be greater than who they are on the court. And I think what you're talking about right now overlaps with his coaching style. I think that would be a great example of transformational coaching.
Yeah, there's a lot of great transformational coaches out there. I mean, John Wooden, you think of Vince Lombardi,
Oh yeah.
um, tons and tons of them out there but there's not enough of them. And I think it really, when you look at really truly successful coaches, you're going to see that they are more transactional or transformational rather than transactional, because that's how you get teams to win. If you're purely transactional, things are going to fall apart as soon as, there's a break. If you're not performing as well, then everybody starts fighting against everybody else instead of encouraging, building up. And, it's kind of the same thing with aging, that if it's purely transactional, then, we become much more discouraged. We can allow illness to bring us down or kind of interfere with our being well. And so we want to really focus on the whole person. And I think that's why our well-centered fitness, our SPIES model of aging well come into play. And then that expansion of the 4 pillars to now the 6 pillars.
Yeah. In the early episodes, we critiqued the fitness myth that we teach kids. So, for example, we critiqued performance, appearance, metrics. How does the myth continue to limit us as we age?
Well, again, the same thing. We're focused on performance. And one of the biggest issues I see with aging is that we expect the aging population to see a decline in performance. And when we're focused on performance, well, it's easy to say, well, yeah, it makes sense. I'm just getting older. You go to a doctor and you're complaining about joints hurting or something like that. Well, you're getting older. Well, that's not a good answer.
I hate that answer.
Getting older does not mean that our joints should be hurting and all that. Yes, there's a more likelihood of that. But we don't want to be accepting all of that. But also, it can discourage us if we're just looking at performance. If we think we can't do something, we're not going to be able to do something. And just like in high school PE, if you're told you can't perform well, you're not athletic, you're not going to do athletic things. And as we get older, if we're told that that's what we're capable of doing, we're not going to try new things. And so that focus on measurements and metrics and all those types of things really limit us in our aging because, again, we're focused on the physical aspect of aging rather than on the fullness of the SPIES model.
I hate that when you go to see a doctor and they're like, it's normal. You're getting older. An example I can think of is I used to be able to see really, really, really far. It's just clear as day, as if it was up close. And as I started creeping into my 30s and actually got into my 30s, it was taking a lot longer to focus on things that were like super far in the distance. And at nighttime, when you're driving down like dark roads where there's not a lot of street lights and other cars would come by, my eyes were having a hard time adjusting at night. And I was like, man, do I need contacts? Like, what is going on? And I went to see an eye doctor and he's like, yeah, everything's fine. You're just getting older. And I hated that. I hated that excuse. So what I started doing on my own, I started taking lutein and to help improvement with eyes, and I started doing eye exercises. I started doing the whole focus, 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 and my eyes are getting back. I mean, they didn't really get weak, so I just hate that excuse of, oh, you're fine, you're just getting older. But I felt like stepping into my 30s, like that's not that old in my opinion. So I don't like that excuse. Um, anyways, sorry about that. Back to our message. What's the dangers of leaning too heavily on measurable outcomes? And I'm talking about steps, weight, lab numbers, and how is that affecting our aging strategy?
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend because aging is something we're all doing and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. We're focused on biometrics. Thank you, and now back to the podcast.
The whole person. And if we say, for example, we're not able to get our steps in and we become discouraged. We think, well, because I can't walk 10,000 steps a day, I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do to age well. But maybe there's other things that we can do exercise-wise. I think probably a really kind of good example of this is a individual I worked with back in Michigan who she and her husband had bikes and they wanted to use them. They knew they could use them for exercise, but they couldn't bike up the hill from their home to where they could more comfortably, bike on a more level. And when I told her, it's like, well, maybe, can you just drive the bikes up the hill and get to a place where you can more comfortably ride and then just ride from there? And she's like, we can do that? And I'm like, yeah, of course. And it was like this big barrier just comes down because they weren't able to do it because they were leaning so heavily into the fact that they had to bike from their home or bike everywhere that they go. And rather than where can I do the exercise that I can currently do and do it effectively to begin to progress up to where I might be in other areas. We might also, weight is often probably one of the worst things that we could be monitoring in our pursuit of aging well, because weight on the scale doesn't tell us anything other than how much we weigh. It doesn't tell us our body composition. It doesn't tell us how our heart, how our muscular systems are all improving from the exercise that we're doing. And we may not be losing weight, and that may be discouraging to us, but in reality, we've been gaining muscle mass. Maybe it doesn't look as such because we have enough body fat over the surface of our skin that the increased muscle mass really doesn't show. And maybe the scale is going up and we're freaking out because I'm working out so hard, but I'm still gaining weight. Ideally, if you have a high amount of body fat and you're working out, initially you should see drops in weight. But if you're not decreasing your calories enough, but you're building muscle and you're losing fat and nothing's changing on the scale, that's still a pretty good thing because your body composition is improved. But you might not be seeing that, wow, my heart's functioning better, my blood pressure is lower, and I'm feeling better. I got more energy, all those types of things. Those outcomes, can really be a bad focus for us. Lab numbers, what's my cholesterol like, and all that kind of stuff. And health and aging is so much more than just a few numbers that we might be looking at. And if we're only focused on those, then, maybe as we do age and there is that more natural decline in some of those numbers, it frustrates us and causes us even greater decline from exercise. And so, again, we don't want to necessarily worry about the measurable outcomes. Those are certainly important because we talk about SMART goals. You want to have, specific, measurable, achievable, generally talk in terms of being not reasonable by ordinary standards and then having a time scale on them. But, it's more important, yes, to have those goals that are measurable, but to also be looking a little bit more at the qualitative nature of how we're aging. How are our relationships? How is the fact that I'm exercising boosting my intimacy with my partner or, my relationship with my kids, my performance at work, all those types of things are things that are maybe a little less measurable, but are probably in the end much more important.
So one thing I really like that you do is you frame aging and movement as biomechanical, psycho, and social. And something that our listeners may not have the luxury of knowing because they're just hearing four words is in between each one of those words is a hyphen, which merges them all together and combines them. Do you think you could explain why it's essential to hold these together rather than just let one dominate?
Yeah, and let me kind of just backpedal a little bit on where that all comes from. It's something I've adopted in my teaching as a formal part of my teaching. I mean, I think it's been there for a long time and certainly been emerging over the course of time. But when we look at, whether it's looking at exercise physiology, exercise science, or if we're looking from a medical perspective, we often just focus on the biological. And I first kind of heard the phrase biopsychosocial, listening to a few different doctors that I kind of enjoy their work on YouTube. And, the one was interviewing a psychologist and talking about depression and things like that. And talking about how we tend to just treat illness from a biological standpoint. And this is one of the reasons why, and I'm going to, my apologies to the biology and chemistry professors out here that have pre-med students, but I honestly think that for the most part, medical doctors should go through an exercise science program as a pre-med program, because when we focus only on the the more basic sciences as a precursor to our medical training, we tend to just be focused on the biological. So when you have a physician who comes from a biology background, they maybe don't understand as much the psychosocial piece of the individual. And so when somebody has a disease, we're going to look at the symptom and say, okay, here's a drug that you can take to manage that symptom. Whereas what I hope to engage in my students and in our listeners and viewers here as well is that our approach to aging needs to be biopsychosocial. We're also involving the psychology and the social interactions and their importance in aging. And so I've heard, this phrase biopsychosocial. And so I started to adopt that. And I was talking to one of my former colleagues, Lex Gidley, who was the biomechanics professor at Western Oregon University for a few years, prior to kind of moving on to the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. We're talking, and she said, "Oh, but it's biomechanical psychosocial." And I said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right there, because how we move, our capacity to move, also has a tremendous impact on how we frame our aging, how we frame our movement capacity." And so I've added that into there as well. And again, you kind of separate the biological and the mechanical, although biomechanics is the merging of the two. But, we can't just focus on the biology. We can't always just focus on the mechanical either, which in a lot of cases, you might see that in areas like physical therapy, where they're not looking at many of the other health issues, nutritional issues, and things like that might be impacting how somebody is performing in their gait and how they move their bodies relative to their injuries. But then we also have to focus in on the psychological piece. What's motivating us, what's not motivating us, how much self-efficacy do we have, how much confidence do we have in being able to do the task? Are we battling depression? Are we battling PTSD? Are we, dealing with trauma in our lives? Are we dealing with stress? Who's not dealing with stress? All of those things factor in as well. And then social, if you don't have good social connections, the aging process is going to be diminished. We've established that. And I think the science is backing that up more and more and more, that, the social piece is so much more important than the rest. If you go look at the people in the blue zones, they're not talking to you about the biomechanical side as much. They might not even be understanding how much their movement is impacting their aging, but they will tell you about the relationships in their lives and all that kind of stuff. And they're living very social, very connected lives. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. And I think what you just said, it just makes me, makes me question, like, how we here in a Western world, specifically America, we really take that for granted. Um, don't we? Because we want to get healthy, we want to get that instant fix, but I don't think we truly understand the importance of that social connection. We have an idea and we love it when we're a part of something greater than ourselves, or we have a purpose, or we can, you know, iron sharpens iron, and we can be around people that give us that joy, or we can impact them. But I don't think we really grasp it. We have a small understanding of it, but the overall concept of how it is for our health, you got me thinking, Dr. Armstrong. You got me thinking this morning.
That's good.
Hey,
That's my goal.
so speaking of thinking, can you give an example of someone who's biomechanically fit, but they're kind of experiencing psychologically or social privation in their aging journey?
So I could probably give a lot of examples, and we've kind of shared one in recent episodes. And First one that really comes to mind for me, and I'm not going to mention any names, but most of our viewers and listeners will probably put two and two together. There is an individual who is spending millions of dollars a year to live longer. And from all measurements biologically, he's aging well, quote unquote. But those biomarkers alone, the fact that their body composition is really low and they're getting, the precision of sleep, where they're every night the same bedtime, every morning the same rising time, to the point where they can't even have an intimate relationship with their partner because they're they're so focused on their sleep quality and quantity. And they're exercising, so they're moving, they're got good, so if you look at the parameters of health, cardiorespiratory endurance, muscle strength, muscle endurance, flexibility, body composition, they might be hitting all those markers. I might argue, I don't know what his strength levels are, but I want to see what he can Zercher squat. And that would be a test of whether he's aging well or not, in my mind. But, and then you look at, speed, agility. In fact, they're probably not even focused on those types of things, those neuromotor skill related components of physical fitness either. And so even in that situation, I would say they might not even necessarily be perfectly biomechanically fit, but psychologically and socially, I would argue that there is great impoverishment there. That individual is so focused on the biomarkers and getting to this age in chronological years that they neglect their social connections. There's probably something borderline socially or psychologically unfit in that approach to living. And it's not aging well. They're missing out. Again, anybody who is missing out on the spiritual, the emotional, and the social pieces of the well-centered fitness model, they're not, in my opinion, really truly aging well. And so that's one example. You can have a lot of individuals. You look at almost any elite athlete for a period of time is not aging well because they're putting so much effort into their physical and their biomechanical performances that they are often particularly sacrificing social connectedness. And that can be offset. I mean, obviously having good team connection and still trying to maintain good relationships in their home life can be beneficial there. And psychologically, they might be doing as well, but there's always going to be a little bit of imbalance in the focus in those situations. But in most cases, athletes that are well-trained, well-coached, and have good support systems are going to avoid some of that. But there can certainly be examples of individuals who are just overly focused on the physical and the mechanical aspects of their performance. Does that give you a good enough example?
Yeah, like don't hyper focus in one area versus, trying to keep it evenly spread out in the other areas is essentially what you're saying, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much.
Okay. So how so if someone's not doing that, let's give them some advice to do a checkup from the neck up, we'll call it. So how would one audit or do a self check that we aren't sacrificing one domain for the sake of another domain?
Well, I wouldn't call it a checkup from the neck up because, again, it's the whole person. should be a checkup from the floor up.
Hey.
Making sure that everything is encompassed in there. There's a lot of ways that we can do that, and I would probably refer our viewers and listeners back to the episode where we did the SPIES checkup or the SPIES check-in. I forget exactly what we called that episode, but that's probably one of the best ways, is just to be reflective across the dimensions of wellness. Looking at, okay, spiritually, how focused am I on myself versus others? And there needs to be a balance in that. When we say you want to be other centered, you want to be, again, to be aging well, you can't be so overly other centered that you forget about yourself, your own self-care. And self-care is often needed in order to be more other centered. And so if we're sacrificing our health, and a lot of women do this, especially as they go through the parenting years, and then they get into that sandwich generation where maybe they're charged to take care of their elders, they neglect their own health and they age poorly. And then somebody's going to be, stuck having to care for them in their later years. And so I want to, am I doing the things that we teach about here on the Aging Well podcast? Am I exercising regularly? Am I fasting periodically? Am I meditating? Am I doing something mindful that is helping me to keep focused on things other than myself? Am I maintaining some level of brain stimulus, intellectual stimulus? And what am I doing to manage my emotions? How am I managing stress? How am I managing relationships with others? And then how is all of this playing into the relationships I have? What can I do better to be improved in these areas? So I think one of the best ways that we can self-check ourselves or audit ourselves is to be journaling regularly, be reflective, set goals in each of these areas, and just evaluate, how am I doing in these areas, not being overly critical, but being much more growth focused in terms of how we approach each of the different areas. And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly if one domain is being sacrificed at the sake of another. If we're looking at the whole picture of wellness, that whole well-centeredness, looking at, okay, where am I relative to the asymptote of perfection? What areas are strong? Which areas are weak? How can I boost up the weak areas without really diminishing the stronger areas? What about yourself? How do you manage your well-centeredness or your SPIES?
Well, I really try and focus on the spiritual aspect first. The older I'm getting, and most of our listeners know, like, I have started a walk with Christ, and it's in putting that spiritual aspect first. If I'm not if I'm not putting him first or giving him my best right in the beginning, right when I start my day, everything kind of starts off wacky. um it just kind of transition, and so I've come to the realization that there's really nothing I can do without him. Now I can think I can go back and look at my younger self and think, oh, I didn't need anyone, I can do this all myself. But the older I get, the more I realize, like, Lord, I need you. I need help. I need guidance. I need a spiritual push, or maybe physically I'm feeling fatigued right now. I need that little jolt of energy, and just having that relationship, focusing on that spiritual aspect, has changed my whole mindset, my emotions, my everything. It's really kind of pushed me forward, and it's helped me realize that there's a whole nother world around us that we don't even see. And then obviously, the with that being said, um, I still am a huge advocate for psychological health as well. I think that we've come leaps and bounds and we've come really far with it, but I still think we have a long ways to go. And as far as myself and what I do, sometimes I just need to reset the batteries. You know what I mean? Sometimes I just need to go out and do something. Maybe it's go on a hike, maybe it's create a fire, maybe it's watch the sunset. I just need something where there's no distraction and I'm just like just in this moment and just kind of clearing my brain. I don't necessarily need to be around social people, which when I was younger, if I had whatever issues that were going on, I try to distract myself by getting involved in too many things at the same time. And I've learned, like, hey, it's okay to just be in quiet and be in silence and just take a moment to breathe and recharge the batteries. And as far as physical goes, um, I just, I'm just in the field of work that I have, especially having more of a desk job, taking time to actually focus on physical health and get back into the swing of things, it's it's leaps and bounds. And after being a part of this podcast, I really do our I call them Superior Seven. I know you don't like that idea, but I love it, and it's those basic movements. I mean, they seem so simple, but they're such a necessity for our physical well-being. I hope that answers your question on that.
Actually, it doesn't.
Oh,
You're telling me what you're doing in each of those dimensions, but how do you know that you were in the right balance within these? I mean, you talk in terms of like the spiritual faith. It's very easy for someone to become overly focused on, if they're a Christian walking with Christ, somebody who's listening who's, maybe considers themselves not spiritual because they're not religious might tune that out. But, the whole idea of the spiritual is, again, being more other centered, being kind of beyond the just, relationship with Christ, but having a walk with him, where it's a part of all of the components of what they're doing in life. So how do you know that you're not spending too much time in any one of those areas at the sake of one of the others? How do you know that you're in the right balance? How do you know that you are well centered?
well, um, I guess recognizing when you've hit a point of fatigue. And this isn't as easy as it may seem because we all know what physical fatigue is, right? We've all pushed ourselves in the gym or we've all overdone it so far and we know that feeling of physical fatigue, but do we know what emotional or mental fatigue is? And some of us can say, yeah, I know what mental fatigue is. Um, I crunch numbers all day. Sometimes when I'm done, I'm exhausted, and some people are more of an introvert versus an extrovert. So when they're around people, uh, they feel exhausted, but people that are extroverted, they kind of get this supercharge and may not be aware of, no, I have this social fatigue. So I think recognizing when we've hit a fatigue in one of those areas, and we may be pushing it a little too far. And I just, I don't know. I'm not perfect by any means. There's some days that I'm I'm nice and balanced within each realm. There's other days where maybe I've overdone it in another realm, and that's just the way the cards were dealt, or maybe I self-inflicted myself. Maybe I overcommitted and I just was like, oh gosh, I gotta do this. But I'm learning to recognize when I'm stepping into an area of fatigue in either one of those to just kind of pull back a bit and just focus on the other areas for a temporary time in order to balance everything out. And when you do that, I've learned it kind of all balances. It kind of just works out that way. It just recognizing when you're starting to hit fatigue in another area. I feel like that may or may not have answered the question.
Well, I mean, I still feel like you haven't, presented a way that you actually reflect on these and how you're able to kind of self-audit. But that's fine. That's what we're trying to educate and try and encourage our viewers and listeners to find that pathway to how they can balance those areas out.
Well, okay. Let's flip the script. Let's flip the script a bit. So, if someone is doing a lot of physical but neglecting spiritual or social, what distortions or disconnects tends to creep in? What does that look like?
So if somebody's doing a lot physically but neglecting the spiritual and social, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to see what's going to, turn in. Their social connections are going to start to break apart. Maybe they're fighting more with their spouse, their partner, or they're, neglecting, being a good neighbor, being a good, friend to the people around them. And so it's very easy to see some of those disconnections creep in if we're not balanced in those areas, because I mean, I do think the spiritual and the physical are the foundation pieces. And if we are exercising and taking care of ourselves physically, and we are taking care of ourselves spiritually, and we're starting to see that spiritual connection and how the body and the spirit, getting down into that kind of quantum physics level, or getting out to, the ever expanding universe piece, all of that kind of that awe of what is going on around us. When those are together, it leads us into the other dimensions. It leads us to being more intellectually interested and curious. And that curiosity leads us to learning more, and that learning more and having this much more open connection with others leads us to exploring ourselves deeper emotionally and seeing, what's triggering me, what is, bringing me up, bringing me down. How are my actions affecting other people? And that leads us into that kind of social piece as well. And then the more socially connected we are, the more it kind of feeds back to the other areas. And so if somebody is doing a lot physically, but neglecting the spiritual and the social, chances are they're going to get out of balance, both emotionally, socially, spiritually, and all those other areas. I don't know if that really answers that particular question, but that's where we can begin to see some of these disconnects forming, is we're not focusing in on all 5 dimensions in a much more balanced fashion.
So, how might one reframe a setback in the physical domain? Let's call it due to injuries or illness, and as an opportunity in other SPIES dimensions.
Well, I think, anytime we have an injury, it's going to limit our ability to perform. And it really kind of depends on how are we evaluating that relative to who we are. If we can't do something physically, does that change the person that we are? And if so, how? And how do we either get back to the person we were, or how do we become a better person from that physical setback? In physical injury, illnesses, all those things can give us a chance to be a bit more introspective spiritually, spend more time with our intellectual. It may be that physical injury is kind of the universe telling us, hey, you need to focus more on these other areas. And oftentimes it kind of brings us back on track in those areas. And I would say, look at any kind of setback in life as an opportunity for growth, for change, for becoming who we are purposefully. And, look at it as not necessarily as a positive, but again, as an opportunity. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. It does. I think a good example of this is the movie Friday Night Lights. The character Booby Miles, who was all-star athlete, right? And he ended up tearing the ligaments in his knee, and then after that he was like, man, what am I going to do? Like all I've known my whole life is football. Like that's just it. And he kind of needs to regroup and reset and refigure out who he is as an individual. And then there's another movie out there, also another football movie called My All American. And again, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the main character, but he ends up getting an illness. The only difference is, although he's upset, like, oh man, I'm going to end up losing my leg due to this illness, and that kind of sets back with me playing football, it doesn't necessarily affect him terribly. I mean, it kind of gives him a little stab in the gut just because that was one of his passions, but he had a great relationship with his community. He was doing the spiritual portion, the social portion, and he not only did he know who he was and the important role that he played for his teammates, his family, his community, but it although it hurt him by him losing his leg, it didn't necessarily give him such a culture shock like, oh man, what's next, as it did with Booby Miles in Friday Night Lights, right? Where he was like, what am I gonna do? So yeah, that's what I mean, as you're describing it, that's what that kind of reminds me of is an injury doesn't have to hinder us, but instead it can help us kind of like focus on other aspects. Like, who are we? Are we defined by this physical movement, or do we have other skills? Do we have other things that we bring to the table? I don't know. That's just by you describing it. That's where my mind went.
So, not sure the sports analogies are the best for people who are looking at aging well, but that is part of, aging well begins at conception. So, but, for anybody, any life setback is an opportunity for growth, and having that positive attitude about, what is next, seizing the moment and just going forward is all what it means to be aging well.
So I got a question for you. This world is immersed in biohacking. And I mean, you open up your phone to social media and it's everywhere. They'll talk about cold plunges, red light therapy, peptides, wearing trackers and aura rings and all kinds of stuff, right? So in your view, what's the place for this? And I'm talking, when I say this, I mean biohacking and aging well. Is this an opportunity or is this a distraction?
It's probably safest to say it's a little bit of both. I think it's a huge distraction because, again, it puts us back to focusing in on the biology, the biological, as opposed to the broader aspect of aging well, which is, again, well-centered fitness, the SPIES model. It gives us an opportunity to kind of maybe see where our focus is. If we're so concerned with trying to fix something that is broken rather than trying to fix the cause of what is broken, then, it should be a good reminder that we're off track. And I think when we look at longevity and, compare that to aging well, we are missing a huge, huge amount of opportunity to make people age well. And, cold plunges are great. They're going to benefit you. Red light is great. There's certain peptides that are out there. I've been, just for 2 weeks now, been using a new peptide product that Aura Wellness is about to release, and the stuff is phenomenal. I don't know if it's showing up yet on camera, but in that 2 weeks, a lot of the discoloration, the age spots and stuff on my scalp have started to smoothen out. And my goal is to have a evenly colored dome like Dr. Nan Patel. And you have to watch that episode when it comes out to kind of see that discussion. But, peptides have a place. I think people are getting a little bit overly focused on them. And, we want to look at, and I really love the analogy that Dr. Patel used in our conversation when he was talking about glutathione and how its role is to balance the seesaw, and oftentimes when we're looking at biohacking, we are trying to correct an imbalance. And so something is imbalanced over here. The seesaw is down on one side and up on the other. And so we have to put more weight on the other side in order to right it. And then we bring it down and we usually overcorrect, and then we have to right it again. And so we go back and forth between all of these different biohacks and these supplements and things like that to fix problems that we just end up creating, on the other side of the seesaw. And so we're going back and forth rather than focusing in on, okay, what can we do that is going to enable all the other functions in our lives to work more effectively? And that's where, I'm back to, I'm going to start doing the glutathione every month. It's a little bit on the pricier side, but the glutarol product, I love that stuff. And it is perfect for me. I mean, in terms of helping me feel better, have more energy. I mean, I've been teaching this week and I've just been, I got to slow down. I've got so much energy. And, it's a price wise for me. If I just do 4 sprays a day as opposed to the 2 sprays, so it'd be half a bottle a month, it becomes a little bit more affordable and a bit more effective than what I've currently been taking, which is the Glynac ET. And I'm not giving that example as a plug necessarily for one of our affiliates, but, when we do look at supplementation or biohacking, we have to look at, what are we really doing and what are we trying to accomplish in doing this? And I don't like the word biohacking because I think of hacking as a shortcut. We're going to hack into something. We're going to hack, a hack is something that we do to kind of get around doing it the hard way. And so when we biohack, we're trying to fix something that probably shouldn't be broken in the first place. And so in regards to biohacking, yeah, it may give us a short-term correction to right something that we've done wrong to our body. But if we're not focused on the bigger picture, back to the kind of transactional versus transformational, biohacking is transactional. It fixes something in the immediate present. It doesn't do anything to change us biomechanically, psychosocially to age better. And so we can be distracted by that in that we are always focused on trying to fix something that is wrong rather than fixing what caused it to be wrong in the first place. And they can be an opportunity to get ourselves right and then begin to change our lifestyle in a way that will allow us to kind of keep the ship going forward rather than constantly be bailing water out of the ship trying to keep it from sinking. Does that kind of answer that question?
I would say, yeah, I would say so. I mean, yeah, Y- yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Anyways,
Well, hopefully
let's
our
move on.
listeners and viewers have a little bit more confidence in my answer than you do.
Yeah, I
Well,
think
what
they would. You know
next?
what? I think they definitely appreciate that, doctor. So, how would you
Okay, I hope
counsel
so.
how would you counsel our viewers or our listeners about deciding whether to adopt a new technology, a gadget, or a protocol?
Well, again, I think are you trying to fix something that's broken? And if it's broken, then why is it broken? Is it addressing the initial cause of the problem, or is it just simply masking a problem? And also, is it creating any other problems in the process? Again, going back to our billionaire spending $2 million a year on trying to live longer, loses weight, and because they're trying to live a caloric restricted lifestyle to live longer, but in the process now has to alter their face structure in order to look different, to look like they're not aging. That to me is not a wise use of technology, gadgets, or protocols. So I would say first, okay, why are you considering this technology, gadget, or protocol? Does the science back it up? If there's science behind it, okay, that we check that box. We can start to look at, is this right for you or for me? And again, it's asking the question, why do you feel you need this particular gadget or protocol? If something is broken, is it fixing the problem or is it just fixing the symptom? And if it's just fixing the symptom, back up. What can we do lifestyle wise that in changing that may in fact end up correcting what is wrong in our system? So for example, I mentioned glutathione and taking glutarol, spraying glutarol on the skin. It's like 4 sprays. Just wanted to kind of bring that up. Dr. Patel will tell you himself, focus first on your nutrition, your exercise, your sleep. Fix the things that are causing the stress, that causing your glutathione levels to be overtaxed. And then if there's still a need, because with aging, we're going to see a bit more decline, or there's certain levels of stress that we can't necessarily overcome. We're always going to have radiation, sun, stress at work, all these things that are going to stress us. But if we're eating as best as we possibly can, we're exercising regularly, that supplement, that technology, that gadget, that protocol might be giving us just a little bit better edge to age better. And in that case, okay, great. And same thing with spermidine. We have an episode coming up. I'm not sure if this will air before I talk to Leslie Kenny or not, but talk to her about spermidine. And she has a company that produces a product. It's a spermidine supplement. And it was almost like pulling teeth to get her to talk about the supplement at kind of the end of the podcast, because she was like, people don't necessarily need this supplement, which is kind of amazing for a supplement person to be saying that you really don't need this, because if you eat well, you're managing your stress, do all the things that you should first do to get your body right. And then this is going to help further correct your system. And so any of these protocols and things like that, if it's not fixing the source of the problem, you got to get to the source of the problem first. If it's able to fix the source, then great. And there are other technologies too that are more neutral. I think of monitoring sleep, and we've talked a little bit in past episodes about different trackers that we can wear, the pluses and minuses of different ones. You wear a Fitbit, but you don't really use it because I don't know why.
It just dies like within, and then I put it on the charger, and then I wake up in the morning, and then I forget to put it on. So it's
Yeah.
currently
So,
charging right now,
if it,
actually. So
if it's a technology or gadget you're not going to use or get benefit from it, then why buy it? If,
best part is,
I used the Garmin for the longest time, and the Garmin did its job, but the battery life was really short. And, I got about 36 hours out of it, and I was constantly having to charge it. And a new gadget came along. I saw the Amazfit Helio, and it's very similar to the Whoop. I would love to try the Whoop, but it's like, I can't justify the subscription rate for it. Same with the Aura. If you have the budget for it, that's another factor in terms of counseling our viewers and listeners, is to decide if it fits in your budget. That's got to be, first priority. If you can't afford it, then don't waste your money on something you can't afford when you can spend your money maybe on better nutrition, better exercise facility, or, a gym membership, more equipment at home, whatever it might be. Spend that money wisely. But if you have the discretionary funds, you can afford it, and it is a well-established, well-constructed gadget or technology, then okay, yeah, consider buying it. For me, the Whoop is too expensive, and I don't feel like having to pay an ongoing subscription for the service. And especially when the Helio came out, and it's $99, and it has more than a 10-day battery life. In fact, I forget to charge it because it's just so many days, and it's like, when did I charge this last? I don't have a routine. And especially the fact that it's 10 days rather than 7. I almost wish it had a 7-day battery life. Not really, because I don't want the battery life to be worse. So I'm not going to wish something that I really don't want. But if it's 7 days, then I just know, like, every Saturday morning while we're recording this podcast, I can plug it in and charge it, and then it's ready to go afterwards. It takes like an hour to charge, and boom, you're done. But it's got a great battery life. It gives me really good data. I can track my sleep. There's a lot of other things that it does that I don't use it for, but that I didn't buy it for fitness tracking and all those types of things. I bought it mainly for my heart rate variability, my biocharge, as they call it, and my sleep parameters. How many hours of deep sleep, REM sleep, hours of total sleep I'm getting, when am I awake? Even gives me breathing, gives me heart rate variability. Somehow monitors my hypopnea as well, which seems to do a better job than my CPAP machine actually does. So that's a technology that, it's affordable, it's effective, it's giving me data that I'm going to use and be worthwhile. Trying to think of other gadgets that are, really think of. And when it comes to, red light therapy, if you got the money, there's decent science behind it, and you want to spend the money on it, do it. It's not bad. Not a lot of other gadgets or really even supplements that I'm taking personally. Having a specific protocol, again, how does it fit into your lifestyle? Can you keep with the constant rhythm that you need to be able to do that protocol? Get up, take a certain supplement, or take a, certain food, intake a certain food, or exercise a certain way. How are you structuring your life? That has to be individual. When you look at a protocol, it's got to be highly individualized. And I'm not sure if I've answered everything with regards to that question. Is there anything I'm kind of missing?
no, I do have just kind of one question. What was that supplement called that you had just mentioned when you were interviewing the nutritionist, and they said our bodies don't necessarily need this? What was that called?
She's not a nutritionist. That was Leslie Kenny, who is the founder of Oxford. The Oxford Longevity Project. God, sorry, Leslie, for pausing on that. Not really able to remember it. Quick senior moment there. And then the supplement company is Oxford HealthSpan, but the product is called Primadine. She didn't want to call it spermidine kind of for obvious reasons. She said she couldn't imagine her mother going into a store and asking for the spermidine. It's kind of unfortunately named. It has nothing to do with male semen or sperm, but it's one of the products that is kind of released in fasting, and it's got really great longevity support in terms of promoting autophagy, and just helping to protect the telomeres, and the list of the benefits go on. But it is readily available in a lot of foods. And if you're eating legumes and eating, overall well-balanced, healthy diet, you're probably not necessarily going to need it. And she also underscored that, the needs don't start to emerge until you hit your 30s, really into your 40s. So, once you're 40, 50, you might want to consider supplementation just to be able to boost your body's ability to maintain higher levels for function and when you really actually need it. And so, that was, one supplement that, I think is effective. First day I took it, my sleep scores went up to like 20 points. And I noticed very dramatic improvement from it. Is it something that I would take long term? Probably not. It's probably something that I might take a month dose of it for, once or twice a year, just to get my system kind of corrected. But I'm really focused much more on eating the nutrition that I need to be able to support my, my gut health and natural production of spermidine, and, just decreasing the demand for it in the body. Again, the same thing with glutarol from Aura Health or Aura Wellness. I do believe glutathione as the master antioxidant is probably one of the first things that we really should look after in our health. And if we're under a lot of stress, we're aging, our levels are very likely to be low. And so I was taking the Glynac ET, but I had in the back of my head, but Dr. Patel really underscored for me was when it says it's 20 times more bioavailable, you have to consider 20 times more bioavailable than what? And most oral supplements in general, anything that is, a whole product that is going into our gut is going to be broken down into its constituent parts and then ultimately have to be reconstructed somewhere else in the body. So when we can get all that through our nutrition and our body has all the pieces that we need to build the amino acids or the peptides, then the body's not going to need to take the supplement, and the supplement may not even benefit us in the way that it does. And so most of like the Glynac supplements and especially glutathione, they're all breaking down. You're basically going to break them down into cysteine, and then the liver is going to take the cysteine and make glutathione itself. But the transdermal gets in much more effectively, and I feel something with that. And so I figure if I do a smaller dose of it, it may not have the most optimal effect, but it's going to have a more optimal effect, and it's going to fit more within my budget, like being roughly $60 a month as opposed to, a full bottle being about $120, $125 a month. So yeah. So, you asked me the question about the nutritionist or,
Well,
about Leslie Kenny.
you kind of answered my follow-up question. I wanted to know what the supplement was because I had never heard of that. And I was just seeing when you were saying how she had told you, we don't necessarily need this. And I was like, well, what the heck is this? I've never even heard of it. And then I was just asking for the name and I was going to go into that question, but you kind of just kind of beat me to it. You kind of gave me the name and you went into it, and then you added more on to my next following question, which was, are there any other things that and you kind of covered it all in one swoop. And I was like, Just sit here while he just
And this
answers
might,
my questions that I have for him in my head.
all right, well, this might be a good time to even kind of do a little bit of a plug. It wasn't the intent in doing this episode, but, we are an affiliate for several different companies. And, my apologies, or I'm not going to apologize for it. I mean, we have a brief interruption in the episodes where, we encourage the viewers and listeners, if they want to support our guests and support the podcast financially, because it does take a bit of money and effort and time to produce this podcast and hopefully provide a quality podcast. And so one way to be able to support the podcast is to be able to support our affiliates. And the affiliates that we have listed, when you look in the description notes, there are numerous different affiliates. I have tried all of those products, all those companies. These are companies that we have vetted and feel very comfortable recommending their products because the products work and are effective, and the companies are providing good quality product. Now, do you need all of those? No. But, if you can, if one of them suits your purposes, then, subscribing to those products can actually support us and support your health and your efforts to age well. And so as you look at those, I mean, just to kind of underscore which ones I've tried and I've gotten benefit from, my wife will attest to the Rebalance Health Mints. They have evened out my stress level. I'm a much calmer, more even keel individual. I don't yell at my kids. My kids love the fact that I'm taking those mints. But it just, it helps me sleep. Those are something that I think are absolute necessity for me. I do Jigsaw Health electrolytes. I actually subscribe to those because they're much more affordable than some of the other brands that are out there, and I think a better quality. I know, Corbin, you take some of the magnesium products from them.
Wow. I'm still taking them. Yeah, and they're awesome.
Yeah. And, Berkeley Health is another one that we recommend. Again, it's not something you absolutely need, but if you want to monitor, check to see how your nitrates levels are to affect the nitric oxygen that is affecting your blood vessels, testing strips, they work. I mean, I was able to test mine and see that taking the product for about a month, I was able to improve my nitric oxide levels, which is good for my blood flow and my heart and everything. And there's other ones that are in there as well. I mean, Dr. Lewis's nutrition, I've found great benefit with his polysaccharide. I don't know what else I'm missing. There's a couple others in there that are like, Thrive 25, which is really an app that you might find benefit with. Prolon and L Nutra, they're fasting products. I will use those multiple times a year for, a fasting mimicking diet. Not something you have to do regularly. If you're really, really out of shape metabolically, then maybe 3 months straight of those can benefit you in terms of righting your blood glucose levels, your insulin resistance, and then maybe once a year, 3 times a year, doing that in replacement of a full-on 3-day fast could be benefit. So I'm getting off that kind of selfish plug there for our affiliates. But just understand that when we do talk about specific products, gadgets, technology, and all that on this podcast, we are going to evaluate them critically, and we try to evaluate them ourselves. And we won't recommend anything that we wouldn't use ourselves. And so, be cautious in what you are buying, and understand that you could go overboard in terms of the technologies, the gadgets, the supplements, the protocols, and all the things that we're trying to do to age well, to the point where we're taking hundreds of tablets a day, and you don't know what's really working and what's not working for you. So find what works best for you and invest your money in that. But, save your money for good nutrition, for social interactions, for all the other aspects of the SPIES model that we talk about. What's your next question, Corbin? I went off on a rant there.
My next question is, where is diminishing returns most likely to show up in biohacking efforts as we age?
Well, I think for one thing, diminishing returns are going to begin to show up as we move down the chronological scale. I mean, the younger you are, the less and less benefit you are going to get from most of these biohacks because your body is already healthy enough and is aging well at that moment. So your best bet is to correct your lifestyle early, and you're going to get the best bang for your buck by eating a healthy diet, exercising regularly, having good sleep hygiene, build up those social connections, not smoking, doing all the things that we talk about in the 6 pillars, maintaining a very active SPIES approach to your well-centeredness. And then diminishing return is going to begin to increase the kind of the healthier we are. And the more things that you're doing, the more hacks that you're trying to incorporate into your life, the less real overall return you're going to get from those. So I think the better our nutrition and our lifestyle, the less return we're going to get from any of these biohacks because we don't need them, and where we need them the most is when we are the most broken. And the more we fix ourselves, the less we're going to need them. I think that would probably be my best answer to that idea of diminishing returns.
Yeah. Well, speaking of lifestyle and nutrition, we've talked about nutrition as it being really foundational. Yet most people seek supplements to fill the gaps. Now, I know we just, plugged our affiliates in with this, but in the context of transformational aging, how do you see that tension?
Well, again, I think when we're taking supplements, it becomes much more transactional. It's there to fix a problem rather than to fix the cause. And if it's just kind of masking the problem, then it's not transformational. It's not changing us. If it's giving us the capacity to now maybe move better, eat better, get better absorption of our nutrients, make better use of the foods that we are able to eat, then it's going to be much, much better. It's going to be more transformational. But, again, why are we taking the supplements? What are we trying to accomplish with them? And there are very few supplements that our body really, really needs. Supplements are really filling the gaps. And if we are trying to fill the gap with something unnatural that we can do naturally, then that's not very transformative. We need to fix our lifestyles, fix our diets first, and then allow the supplements to kind of just do their trick to help us do more in life and to age better.
So would you say that there are times when supplements are warranted, or is it just a distraction or a risk taking it?
I think there are times when supplements are warranted, and that's when we have a known deficiency. Many people have no clue whether they are deficient in some of the supplements that they take. You might take a multivitamin just to kind of be sure. It's kind of like getting an insurance policy. It costs you a little bit of money. You might never see a return on it, but, is it worth it if it protects you from getting sick or causing other problems? Sometimes it can create a risk. One thing I hadn't really thought of is, I was talking with Dr. Patel about copper, and, we have created a copper deficiency in our bodies because, since COVID, because during COVID, there was a rush on zinc because everybody thought zinc was going to help keep them healthy and safe. But copper binds zinc and it pulls it out of the system. And that has a tremendous effect on our metabolic function. Mitochondria, ATP production, all that stuff is partly dependent upon copper in our system. But yeah, so supplements can have their place, But again, do you absolutely need it, or is it something that you can correct in your diet and take your diet to be the way to get to a healthy lifestyle? If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's probably not the best answer to that question, but I think
I think
we're in an oversupplemented world
Yeah.
right now.
Oh, I think you answered it. Fun-filled fact about copper. Not only do zinc and copper compete with each other, but if there's too much zinc, it increases grayness in hair, and copper actually combats that. I just read that not too long ago. So that's something I've learned about that. So you mentioned that we're in an over supplemented world. So how do we avoid the trap of nutritional consumerism? And what I mean by that is hunting for the latest pills or protein shakes or whatever the newest trend is to you have to have this. And how do we focus on investing in a sustainable food and lifestyle habits? Because we've long taught the six pillars: exercise, diet, body composition, not smoking, and sleep. And purposeful social connection, of course. But how do these pillars look different when viewed through the lens of transformation rather than more prevention or control?
Well, to answer the first question, we avoid the trap of nutritional consumerism by simply avoiding it. Trying to focus on our diet first, and then look at maybe getting measured for deficiencies. Seeing where we are in fact deficient. But if you're eating enough good healthy food, you're probably not likely to be as deficient. So then, okay, what can I take? If I'm going to spend money on supplements, what's going to give me the most bang for my buck? What do I most need? And, when I look at performance, the only supplements that I list as being effective performance enhancing supplements that are legal would be creatine, whey protein, casein protein's on my list, but I'm less and less inclined to put that on the list because if we start really looking at a diet that is going to be more like a circadian fast, where we're prolonging the period of time where we're going to be in a more fasted state to be able to promote autophagy and get better sleep at night, then we don't want to be consuming protein right before bed because that body now has to put energy into digesting that instead of taking the protein that we've already gotten throughout the day and building proteins and amino acids and everything in the body, proteins and peptides, as we sleep. So I'm a little less inclined with that one. But again, it's not a bad supplement. It's not a total waste of money. The others are caffeine as a stimulant, rather than investing in pre-workout and all that other kind of crap. And then glucose. But again, glucose we can get through our meal timing and everything else. We don't necessarily, unless we're an athlete training really hard, to have to take any kind of glucose supplement, or like an endurance athlete that's depleting their muscle glycogen during exercise. And so creatine from a performance standpoint is one, it's a no-brainer. I think everybody should take. From a aging well perspective, I think creatine also fits into that because of just the opportunities for better brain health and brain energy and so on, and maintaining our muscle mass and being able to exercise more effectively is a good supplement. Other than that, it's like there's not a lot else out there really worth taking. Like I said, I think about the only thing I'm going to be taking for at least a while until I know that I need something else is going to be glutathione and doing the glutarol spray. So it's very easy to get sucked into, because if I go on YouTube, 90% of these influencers that are more than 90%, they're all hawking some kind of supplement. And, this is what you need to take. And it's like, some of them, it's like, do you really take all these things that you say, you take, I've been taking this for 60 days and see what it did? It's like, well, there's only so many 60-day periods in the year, and yet you're promoting so much content. How are you possibly doing all this stuff? So be cautious. Is this stuff really working, or is this something somebody's just making money off of? And again, going back, the 6 pillars, those, as we've been talking about throughout this episode, are highly important for the transformational aspect of aging well. It's not just about prevention and control. It's about becoming better individuals and having the opportunity to be able to do more and do things well. And so, when we look at those 6 pillars, I'm going to say that purposeful social connections has got to be the most important of those to focus on. Sleep would be secondary. And then, diet and exercise are probably fairly even in there. Body composition is going to be important, but it's going to be a fruit of all those other behaviors. And smoking, nobody should be smoking anymore. But the reality is you can find countless examples of individuals who smoked their entire life and are living well into their hundreds. And so, not that I would encourage people to smoke or drink alcohol and do all that, but those are kind of secondary things. Those should be things that are going to help us to maybe live a little bit better as we live longer. But the most important things are going to be those things that are more transformational as opposed to transactional.
Can you walk us through each pillar briefly and give one transformational shift, whether it be a mindset or a tactic that can help an individual in their journey through aging well in that particular pillar?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick too, because I think we've gone really long in this episode, which kind of surprised me. So my apologies, and thank you for sticking around this long in the episode. And so hopefully I give you some reward for sticking around so long. But, when we look at exercise obviously is going to help us to have a better life by, it's going to help us live longer. We know that. It gives us a greater purpose, a reason to kind of get up, maybe to interact with people. We get more variety from exercising. So when we exercise with purpose. We exercise with the goal of longevity in mind. And we're doing a lot of variety so that it's not something that is going to bore us to death or become something we'll be stagnant in. And we need a lot of variety just to be able to trigger the mind and allow the brain to kind of get some of that neuroplasticity going. Diet, we should be focused on diet for nourishment and enjoyment. So looking at buying our food for health purposes, but also for the joy of food and not just the mere consumption of food, and, not making food just a routine. Body composition, it's not about just fat and muscle. It's about functionality and our metabolic flexibility, our ability to be able to perform. Not smoking. Do I have to go anywhere with that one? We've already kind of been talking on that. It's more than, think of it as more than just identity. A lot of people started smoking because it was cool. I don't know anybody that looks cool smoking. And so, it's like any other harmful habit. We just want to avoid it and not start in the first place. Sleep, we got to think of sleep as more than just I'm tired and I guess I better go to bed. We have to be conscious about it being a restorative practice. Think of it as being something sacred, that it's fueling us for the next day. It's allowing us the opportunity for our bodies to heal biomechanically, psychosocially. And purposeful social connections, think of the importance of belonging to groups, not only our benefit from belonging, but what we're contributing to that community and what we are benefiting from in terms of the interdependence in that relational interaction.
So for someone listening who wants to shift from transactional to transformational aging, what's the good first move?
I think sit down and reflect. Pull out a journal, get yourself a notebook, and just write down where am I at in my life? Where do I want to be? Who do I want to be as I age? And what do I need to do to get to that point? And not just focus on, a symptom to be treated, but rather look at how can I transform my body to be its best today, be better tomorrow.
That is good. That's a good first step. So, Dr. Armstrong, I mean, that was so good. I think that literally is a good part for us to end. That first step is actually going to be the last step of this podcast episode, and it's just I think the take home message of this is figuring out who you want to be and be better than you were the day before, and having goals or a mindset that's going to not necessarily transactionally get you there, but transformatively get you there and get you where you need to be. And if you follow these steps or this advice and you stay focused on that, and you're not just improving in one realm, but all areas, by doing that, I would say an individual would age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.